It's nice to see so many old friends here today. More and more people are coming out and feeling safe, and they are. So welcome. What a great subject for today, right? The light. Well, I found Ananda at Ananda Village back in 1970, more than 50 years ago now. And Swami Kriyananda at that time, Ananda's founder, used to enjoy telling a story about the draft. And in fact, the draft was in full session for the Vietnam War at the time. And he said this young man was drafted, and he went in for his physical, and they handed him a clipboard, and he said, "This isn't it." And then they handed him a pen, and he said, "This isn't it." And he walked over to where there were magazines, and he picked one up at a time, and he said, "This isn't it. This isn't it. This isn't it." So they sort of gave up on him, and they sent him down the hall to the psychiatrist's office. And he walks in there, and the psychiatrist was one of those absent-minded professors, so he had a desk, messy desk full of papers. And this young man went up and lifted one at a time and said, "This isn't it, this isn't it, this isn't it." And finally the psychiatrist, without even asking one question, gave up. And he wrote him a medical discharge and handed it to him, and the man said, "This is it." So it is about the light. It's the opposite of "this isn't it." It is it. Everything is light. Light is one of the 8 aspects of God. And so if God is in every atom of creation, then light is everywhere in every atom of creation. We just have to remember to look for that light, to see that light. And Yogananda came to the West to give us techniques of meditation so that we can see that light within and without. So here we are with climate change in one of the hottest days in the Pacific Northwest. Congratulations to everyone for coming into this air-conditioned room today. It's a blessing indeed to have. And yesterday when I was preparing in our hot little house at the Ananda community, I decided early in the morning before the children all jumped into the pool to go out and do some laps, do my exercises in the pool, and it was delightful. But that light isn't the light that I want to talk about today. It's not the light outside of us, because that isn't it on a day like this. It's the light that's within us. A few years ago, well actually it was maybe 10 or 12 years ago, Riemann and I were on our way to the Frankfurt Book Fair to represent Swami Kriyananda's books there, as we did every year for 26 years internationally. That's a whole other story, but my point is that this year on the way over, we decided to stop in Ireland for a couple of nights to jet lag so that when we got to the book fair, we'd have clear minds. And Andrew Salon was kind enough to arrange for his youngest brother to meet us at the airport in Dublin and take us to our, not Airbnb at that point, but B&B just south of the city. It was a gorgeous seaside place. Anyway, this young man, Andrew's brother, very, very nice guy, wanted to show us around a bit. And so after our international flight, on the way to our lodging, he offered to stop by this place called Newgrange for us to see it. And I wasn't sure about that at first. I just wanted to go take a nap. But when we got there, we were both just so amazed. This is a place, it's really large. It looks like a giant stone dome. And it was built 3200 BC. So it was 5,200 years old. It was built before the pyramids. It was built before Stonehenge. And it was made with these giant stones, granite, that they were the size of a 2-story house. They were huge. And they figured out that many miles down the way, there was a stone quarry that these stones came from. And somehow, in 3200 BC, they got these giant stones up the river and then up a hill and placed them into this massive, looked like a mushroom-like structure. They only rediscovered it in the late 1800s. It had become all overgrown. It's 279 feet across, and it's 43 feet high. And you go inside of it, there's an entryway, and there's this long hallway that's wide enough for about 2 people. All the way back, carved into this stone, not one stone, but many stones. And when you got to the back, there was a circular room that was about the size of a typical bedroom or something. And it was circular, and they'd built in stone benches all the way around. And at the far end of it was what Riemann and I felt was an altar. I mean, we felt very clearly that this was a place where people in that time came to meditate. But they were still trying to figure out what it was all about. And they said they thought it had been used as a burial place, but they only found the bones of 2 people in there, so that didn't make sense. Anyway, to us it felt like a very sacred place to meditate. And above the entranceway, there was a hole the size of just a window. And once a year, on the winter solstice, the winter sun in December comes through on that one day, through that opening, and goes all the way to the end of the hallway into that chamber and lights up what we perceive to be the altar. It was magical. It was just amazing. The astronomy they knew, how did they move all those stones? How did they figure out just on that one day that light would come through? But we as human beings, for obviously thousands of years, have understood that there is healing in light, that there is a healing light there. And, I was reflecting on this topic, and there's light as opposed to darkness, but there's also light as opposed to heaviness. And our consciousness typically gets heavy when we're around negativity, when we're around what my son would call Debbie Downers, people who, see the glass half full, half empty rather, all the time. But there's ways, people watch the news. My parents, towards the end of their life, well, after we moved out of the home, not even towards the end of their lives, they installed a television in every room of the house. And every single hour on the hour, they would watch the news. Talk about a downer, And it was, I think it's not unlike what many people do when they have time on their hands. And so it's okay to watch the news or to look at the news on the internet, maybe once a day even, to check out what's going on. But every hour, that's the kind of thing, because typically they don't tell good news, they tell bad news. And so those are the things that affect our consciousness, just as an example. And the other thing that makes our consciousness heavy is that rascal, the ego. The ego has literally a billion self-definitions. I am wearing a pink shirt today. I am black. I am white. I am happy. I am sad. I am French. I am German. It goes on and on, incarnation after incarnation. And I had the image in my mind, not unlike the affirmation today, of this giant sort of rubber balloon that represents our ego. And it is filled with all these self-definitions, our likes, our dislikes, our attachments, on and on and on, is filling up that balloon. And until we can learn to toss these out of our consciousness, the ego is the soul identified with the body and the personality, all our likes and dislikes. And the more we can lighten that load and transcend it, the more we're able to soar in that light. The Bible says, I think it's in Matthew, "Let thine eye be single, and thy body shall be full of light." Let thine eye be single. That's what Yogananda came to teach, and many others. He wasn't alone in this. But this is what we practice here at Ananda, is his teachings. And every single one of the techniques that he taught for meditation, even energization, were concentrating at the spiritual eye. And the spiritual eye happens to be placed, the single eye, let thine eye be single, happens to be placed right there in the forehead, where, guess what? Science recognizes that frontal lobe to be that place in the brain of aspiration, of upliftment. And so when we keep our consciousness there, not just in meditation, but all the time, we begin to see. If, some people see it right away, some people it takes a long time if they're not necessarily visual, but we begin to see the light. And if we're blessed, perhaps we can see now and then the spiritual eye as it's depicted above the masters on the altar here. And so that light, that awareness, not just in meditation, but also during our activity, relating to people from that point of inner light, light to light. This is where our consciousness wants to be. Einstein measured everything in relation to the constant of light. Light is constant because light is God. It's an aspect. It's one of the 8 aspects of God. And so it's constant. God never changes. He says everything else is relative. Everything else is duality. Everything else is flux. But that light, that singular eye, that singular light at that point, that is the divine light. And the Bhagavad Gita Krishna refers to that light as if the light of 1,000,000 suns. And so we prepare ourselves in our meditation for that light, and then we begin to see it everywhere. Joy to you, and have a nice, cool day today.
Let's have a moment of silence.